I once heard a quote that said, "It's good that," and I'm going to be reading Super Chats. Thank you, Ian. They said, "It's good that most people are sheep." Think about this for a second, y'all. It said that it's good that most people are sheep. Now, why would they want you to be sheep? Ask yourself that question. Why would they want you to be sheep? Because sheep don't know any better. They're largely being controlled by the shepherd. And so if the shepherd does not have good intentions, in which the sheep has no clue whatsoever. So when you see most of these people, right, and they have these talking points and they'll say, the dumbest thing that I hear people say online, bag chasers, never let me catch you saying this. The dumbest thing that I see people say is, they shouldn't be doing this because rich people do this. They shouldn't be doing X because rich people do Y. It's the dumbest statement that I ever heard, and it shows me that you are just assuming that you know what rich people do because you aren't one. You can't say, I do this because I'm rich. You have to guess based off of what you heard on YouTube or somebody else, or an assumption based off of what was marketed to you. And that's why you found yourself with a savings account in the bank in the first place, because you don't know how money works and you just went off of what somebody else told you. You went and got a 30-year mortgage thinking that you was owning something, and now we facing the apocalypse. Well, we gonna get into it. Don't worry about it, right? But the quote basically was saying that it's a good thing that the overwhelming majority of people have no clue of what happens when it comes to money, the banking system, and so on and so forth. Because if they did, then you would upend the entire system itself. And since yesterday, since Monday, because really this is banking week. This is the week that you get a deep dive or a crash course that you will never get inside of any major university. You will never get inside of any kind of, what do they call those things where you, where the software engineers, they do the quick course or whatever. Like, you can't get this level of information this quickly based off of a show. You can't go to MSNBC, you can't go to CNN, you can't go to any of these shows and they're going to break it down to you from this perspective. So this week, you're going to get a crash course on how it is that you're supposed to look at money. And if most people understood how money worked, or you really knew what the banking system was like, you would have seen things and you would have became a bag chaser a long time ago. Shout out to all of my Patreon members. So we're going to start off by showing you what a lack of consumer confidence in the banking system looks like, and why, if you did not watch the show yesterday, make sure you go and watch the live stream yesterday, or go and watch the clip that I just dropped this morning. Why it's so important for Biden. He didn't get up there and talk about an update on the Ukraine war. He didn't go up there and start talking about the presidential election. He didn't go up there and start talking about who's in the Supreme Court and abortion and all this other type of stuff. For some reason, the number one priority for our president of the United States, and he's just a puppet, so it's all of the people that's behind him. The number one thing that he was up there to do was reinstill confidence. And so they willing to spare no expense, print no amount of money. Don't matter what the Fed is doing, inflation, fuck it. They willing to do whatever it is to take to instill consumer confidence in you, because they need you to believe in the banking system. It's the number one system in the United States of America that we have. But let's deep dive, and I'm going to use several different references in order to illustrate to you why it's so important for him and everybody else in the federal government and business leaders, and even, to be honest with you, for your own well-being, because you aren't prepared for the banking system to fail, for them to instill confidence in the banking system that we rely so heavily upon in the United States of America.
Dave, looking at this, it wasn't as though the banking side of things was, as rosy as people are now thinking it was before this happened.
Yeah, when you look at the latest filings, and so this is information really from the banks themselves on some of their unrealized losses, for example, right? So what we're looking at here, and this is, again, based on...
So when they say unrealized losses, okay, I want to break these terms down for you so that you don't get lost in the sauce. They like to use these big terms in order to distract you or mislead you. And instead of us saying, hey, teacher, What do they mean by this? Because I don't understand it. We so busy as a culture trying not to look bad instead of trying to get the understanding. The Bible saying everything you do, get understanding. So if you don't understand the term, you very well could change the dynamics of your whole family structure just by getting an understanding of the terms that they're using. So when they say unrealized losses, that means that they have not yet substantiated those losses on paper. You can buy a stock, right? And the stock could dip and you could be down 50% on that stock, but it's unrealized because you haven't sold the stock at a loss yet. So on paper, the actual value of that thing is lower, but you haven't taken a loss yet because you haven't yet liquidated your position in that holding. And so even though the bank itself may be underwater, it's still technically in business, even though it's at a loss, because it's an unrealized loss or an unrealized gain. If you hold on to something and you buy it low and you just let it continue to compound and you continue to reinvest in it, it's an unrealized gain because it can't be substantiated from a tax perspective or really on paper, and they're not using it as a write down yet. So when they say unrealized losses, they saying that the banks are bleeding. People have lost confidence in what's happening within the banking system, but they can't substantiate those losses yet because they're unrealized. So that is the terms that they're going to use. And I want to break this down to you from a C student's perspective so that you understand what it is that they're using against you, and that it's your lack of information, your lack of knowledge, and your lack of understanding as to why you can't and why you don't even watch these channels, because they haven't dumbed it down and made it entertaining enough for you to actually want to do the thing that's in your own best interest.
Their latest filings, unrealized losses on securities available for sale. That's different from the other bits that they're sitting on. But essentially what we're looking at here, just to give you a sense, right? So the scope is 160 major U.S. banks. And why is it 160? So we've taken a look at banks with assets of more than $5 billion. And that sort of narrows your scope. Total losses, unrealized, again, unrealized as of the last filing of over $200 billion. Now, there's the reason why the latest filing is important.
Do you know how big of a number $200 billion? When you look at banks with assets of over $5 billion or more, 160. Listen to the scope of this thing. I know y'all don't think it's a big deal, but it is a huge. And when I say huge, I'm saying huge. Remember, the first thing that Biden did when he got up in the morning yesterday is he came on panel and he said, listen, the banks are safe. The banks are safe. We got you. We got you. We're going to protect you. 8 banks with a loss to equity ratio above. Do you know what a loss of 30% is? Now, we're not talking about banks that we're not talking about me, right? If I lose 30% of my net worth, it's going to hurt. But it don't hurt the same way that it hurt when you got $206 billion in losses, because those are your deposits, which is one of the reasons why they had the FDIC insure banking deposits, because they wanted to instill confidence in the banking system because of what happened with the Great Depression way back in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, right? But because you never lived there and your parents never taught you what was going on there, you never realized the lessons that came along with it and how they then came out of that recession in order to really, really get wealthy. Some people got wealthy and some people just died off and continue to live their life, right? But let's continue.
Because since then, a couple of things have happened, right? The U.S. government coming in and guaranteeing and backstopping some of the funding stress. That's one. There's this massive move up in treasuries. That's number 2. And so you look at a loss like this, might actually be not as big already. But it's a reminder of what happens when rates move up and the bonds that you're sitting on go the opposite way as far as value is concerned, right? So when you try and determine...
Now remember, y'all, these are numbers that were happening before consumer confidence eroded this week and last week based off of the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. This was before. These are numbers that are reported before the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. 30%, $206 billion. We talking about trillions of dollars here, y'all. Wiped off the books just like that. Unrealized losses. Let's continue.
Why did we see big moves in some names and not others?
Now remember, listen, if you go to my LinkedIn, and this is the difference between people that really live it and people that just talk about it, okay? If you go to my LinkedIn, what was the last bank that's not the one that I currently am at, because I can't put that information out there, obviously. But what was the last bank that I worked at before I retired in 2019? Boom, 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 boom. If you go to my LinkedIn, because listen, I use my real name. I have my real jobs on my LinkedIn, right? If you go to my LinkedIn and you start paying attention to what it was, the last place that I worked at, where I really, really cut my chops at to be able to better understand what the banking industry is. You got it right, Kojak. Comerica Bank. Now, interestingly enough, what bank is at the top of this list right here? What bank is at the top of this list right here? When you go back into my videos, and this is why it don't get no realer than this. It don't get no realer than this. If you go back into my videos, and I had my take your daughter to work day, daddy-daughter work day, and I was taking them through the building, that's the building that I were taking her in. I was taking her through the Comerica Bank building, and I showed her everything from the bottom floor all the way up into the executive offices. You can go back and look at the video yourself. It was uploaded in like, I don't know, 2017 or 2016 or some crap like that. Yep. Now look at it. Unrealized loss to equity ratios, 42% just from one bank. Now you're talking about over 160 banks, ladies and gentlemen, which is a $3.74 billion loss. Let's continue.
With the fact that some of them actually, when you look at, say, loss ratios, for example, unrealized loss to equity ratios are higher compared to others. Here's a list based on their own filings on what that actually looks like. Comerica is at 42%. Now, what do the big banks look like? For example, just to give you a sense of scale, not so much as far as ratio, but absolute value is concerned, Citigroup's at the top, 40-something billion at about 19%. So
now let me tell you something. When they start playing with percentages, you got to pay attention, okay? And I want to continue to add the context because I want y'all to come along this journey and learn with me. When they go back and they said Chase, 42%, Comerica, 42%. Comerica is not the biggest bank. Comerica had the biggest percentage of ratios as far as what it was that they were losing as far as the equity and the value of the bank based off of their deposits. Now they talking about the biggest banks. They moved over into the next slide, and they're talking about the biggest banks in the United States of America. And that's when you start seeing the Citigroups, the Bank of America, the Chase, Trust Financial, Wells Fargo, so on and so forth. Now, the other side of the conversation is that there are certain banks that participate in and diversify their portfolio based off of a certain thing. And then there's other banks that then lend to a specific demographic of people or businesses or mortgage companies or things like that. For example, Silicon Valley Bank, you can tie that directly to the downfall of a lot of these Silicon Valley companies, such as the Metas, such as the Microsoft, such as the different tech companies, the Salesforce, and so on and so forth. As those companies continue to lose and they went through a recession within a recession, it directly impacted and negatively affected the banks that lended to them the most, which was a Silicon Valley Bank. I tell you all the time, it doesn't matter if it's money, politics, even in the Patreon, I dropped a video of the 8 things that I look for when I'm looking to invest in a company. If you follow the money, this is not a systematic oppression war. This is not the oppression Olympics. This is not something that they have against black people or white people. This is a economic war. It is a class war. The slavery that you will experience will come along with homelessness because you don't have enough money and you truly don't understand or have the knowledge that's associated with being able to make a smart decision long-term that's going to affect your family. It's an economic war. It's a class war. It's a war against those that know and those that don't. Those that know and those that don't. So when you start to look at this, right, and you have these conversations, think, use your brain. We're not using these no more, black people, white people, Asian people, whatever, so on and so forth. We not using these no more. These don't work in 2023. It's this. This is the thing that's gonna help your family survive. This is your provision and protection, not this. This can't help you no more. This ain't gonna get you off the streets and keep your family from being homeless. You can't do this no more. You gotta use this now.
Just to emphasize, over 200 billion unrealized losses, latest filings, and that number probably has changed, Rish, given the move that we've seen recently in treasuries, which obviously tends to benefit given a 100 basis point move in 2-year yields. Rish.
Now, let's pivot for a minute. Because I want to show you something. Now I want to show you how the game is really played, okay? I want to show you something. Let's go ahead and let's continue.
The biggest bank collapse since the 2008 financial crisis, and it shut down today. It's called Silicon Valley Bank, and it is one of the tech industry's largest lenders, also lends to individuals across the country. It is now under...
Let me give a shout out to Jalen Hawkins for the $2 on Cash App. I appreciate you. Also to Mike Guest, I appreciate you for the $5 on Cash App. I'm going to be reading Super Chat shortly. Thank you guys to everybody that's supporting the platform. Let's continue to rock out.
Control of the federal government. It was a sudden implosion, and it came after a run on deposits. So the bank stock lost 80% of its value this week, 60% in one day alone, yesterday.
Can you imagine losing 60% of your net worth in one day? 60% of your net worth in one day. And this is why I tell y'all that just because you throw your money into the stock market without understanding exactly what you're doing, you're gambling. That's all you're doing is gambling. Making an informed decision is what the CEO did. Don't worry. We're going to get there. Let's continue.
Shares halted. It was over quickly. And then police showed up at the bank headquarters in California today. You're looking at that here. Customers reportedly even lined up at a bank branch on Park Avenue in New York City. The NYPD showed up there. Those customers demanding their deposits back. Now, to be clear, Silicon Valley Bank is a huge bank, and its customers include individuals as well as household names you may know, like Airbnb, Pinterest, Cisco. And this is a way bigger story.
Airbnb, Pinterest, Cisco. What do all of these companies have in common? They're all technology companies. Every last one of them are technology companies. And I'm gonna go even deeper later on this week when I start talking about debt. Because a lot of y'all truly don't understand what it means to use debt, right? Some of these companies, one of the reasons why they were heavily affected by the decision for this bank to absolutely be taken over by the federal government and collapse is because of debt. Don't worry. We gonna get there. We gonna cook all week long. But let's continue, ladies and gentlemen.
The entire banking industry is feeling the impact. U.S. banks at one point had lost over $100 billion in stock market value in just 2 days. And there are fears now that this could spread beyond banking to other parts of the economy.
And what did I tell y'all yesterday? Don't worry, we gonna get there.
This is like the S&L crisis in the 80s.
We're not talking about a failure of this bank, but that banks could, fail.
So
that's not off the question.
This is clearly an example of something breaking. We can assume that there's serious contagion here.
Okay, so when you use the word contagion, it begs the question, why could this happen at other banks? Well, for one basic reason, Silicon Valley Bank was doing what a lot of other banks are doing right now.
Me too.
SVB took customer deposits, and they went and invested that money in other things like U.S. government debt and mortgages. And they had been...
Because you don't even know what the banks is doing with your money when you decide to put your money in the bank. You just see it on a branch on a corner, and they said, hey, we'll give you an extra $600 in your checking account if you give a direct deposit over the next 3 months. And you said, cool, I'm in. You don't even know. Y'all are wild to me and how y'all push back on me. I'm reading the super chat shortly. Y'all are wild to me. I did a challenge, right? Some of you remember this and some of you don't. Because some of y'all did it and some of y'all didn't. And I did a challenge. And I said, for every pair of sneakers that you buy, cut it in half and then invest half in a company that you actually really believe in, the one that you're buying the sneakers from, and then spend the other half on the sneakers. And then that's going to inspire you to start doing a deeper dive into where I'm putting my money at, because when you got to put your money somewhere, it hit different. And then that's going to open a door for you to start evaluating and researching and trying to evaluate whether or not this company is actually a company that I should be keeping my money in. So when you go and you make a deposit, or you keep the overwhelming majority of your money in a specific bank, do you even know what they do with that deposit? Do you even know what these insurance companies are investing in with the float money? Do you even know how Warren Buffett made his money? His initial $1 billion? Do you even know what this bank, do you listen to the calls, the analyst calls every 3 months, every quarter, to know exactly what this bank is starting to do in and whether or not it's going to collapse? Or do you just say, you know what, I'm going to put my money in there because it's FDIC insured, blah, 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 blah?
Been doing that for quite a while. Well, when the Fed started to hike rates aggressively, that meant that Silicon Valley Bank immediately lost money on those investments. And at the very same time as they were losing money, as interest rates rose, those bank customers, those depositors, they needed to withdraw more money. So SVB started to sell assets, losing money just to raise the money needed to make good on deposit withdrawal requests.
So what happens is, when there's a recession, there's not a, listen, when the U.S. economy say we in a recession, and you say, well, but I still got my job, it's a recession at the top. And then it's slowly going to start trickling down. And by the time that you figure it out, you're going to be standing there with the police, and it's going to be martial law at the bank to try to get your money out, and they don't have the deposits to be able to give you. The recession works like this for a large company like that. When they take a L and they take a hit, it wipes off billions of dollars off of their balance sheet. Okay? Now, one of the things about banks that people really don't understand is that once they start having that billions of dollars wiped off of their balance sheet, it's a very tricky task in order to keep the bank solvent. And that's why a lot of banks, on average, well over 10 every single year, goes into default mode and they completely collapse. They just not as big, or they don't lend to as many big businesses such as Silicon Valley Bank did. And so what happens is, when an industry starts to collapse, it then forces the banks to start making a run on their money, because then customers start getting antsy and they want to withdraw things such and start having cash, because they're no longer having confidence in whether or not this company is going to be solvent. If you knew that a company was going to collapse, the first thing that you would do is try to be the first one at the door to try to get your stuff up out of there. You will be the first one to the door. Now, in order for the bank to stay solvent, they then have to be able to get enough cash or raise enough cash in order to make sure that they can fulfill your confidence and substantiate whether or not you can pull money out of the bank. And so these things that they were taking L's on, they couldn't. Remember in the beginning of the stream where I told you about unrealized gains? They would like to hold out until they feel as though it came back around. But the problem with that whole thing is that then you have essentially what we call, on individuals, we say it's a margin call. The margin call is basically, it's time to pay the piper, right? And so what happens is they have to sell those assets at a loss, which exponentially multiplies the possibility of that bank collapsing. But the federal government is never going to advertise it the same way that they say GameStop is messed up, or Kroger is going to leave your neighborhood, or Walmart is leaving out of this neighborhood. They're not going to advertise it the same, because they still need you to have consumer confidence in the banking system itself. And so banks fail regularly, and they have to pay the piper regularly. The problem is that we're not looking at why they find themselves in this position in the first place. But let's continue. I'm reading.
And then that turned into a spiral of fear and a race among customers to withdraw assets, the run on the bank. And yesterday afternoon, the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank, his name is Greg Becker, hosted a call with clients and said, quote, "My ask is to stay calm, because that's what's important. We have been long-term supporters of you. The last thing we need you to do is panic." Well, when
stay calm, guys. The bank CEO is going to come to you and he's going to say, "Hey, guys, listen, I need y'all to stay calm. Have some confidence in us. The last thing we need you guys to do is panic. We've been supporting you guys for all of this time. I need y'all to stay calm and stop trying to pull y'all money out of the bank, because we're going to collapse."